sitting here in the bottom bar of the Prince of Wales Hotel with Anna Weatherall, who's launching her book called Fly. Just tell us about why you wrote the book and what brought you to write this book called Fly on your memories of when you were living in the hardcore punk scene in Melbourne in the early 80s.
I was in my early 30s and I was living in a commissioned flat housing near Amsterdam and lonely, looking out the window at the freezing cold. And I was thinking back on the best part of my life, basically, and that was in the 80s, going to see bands, having a whole lifestyle that was crazy and mental at the time. But looking back, I kind of longed for that camaraderie, all my friends and mates and people living with. So I had all these diaries. I've always wanted to be a writer. And I just thought, I have to make something of that. What's the point of having it all written down there? And so I just turned my passion into words on a page.
It's a pretty hard-hitting book. I mean, you touch on the band scene here in Melbourne in the early 80s, like bands like Vicious Circle, Death Sentence and Gash, but it's mainly a personal journey of your 2-year period in Melbourne, and you talk about like the drug scene and the squat scene in particular and prostitution rings and bikie wars and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you must have been really in the whole thick of it. You're a squatter, were you? You were living from squat to squat.
Yeah, definitely. You might get 2 weeks out of one place and then you might have to sleep on somebody's sofa for a while. You go straight to another empty house. But we had some good long-running ones.
And your character in the book is a character called Aggro?
Yeah. Well, my name back then, I used to have a missing front tooth as well, as the main character does. And it was just a nickname. I never beat up anyone. Massive guys are Little Aggro Annie, and that's what they used to call me. So,
I was involved in the band scene. I used to run a record label and go and see bands in the early 80s. On the front cover of your book, there's a flyer of a Vicious Circle gig. Just tell us about the gigs that you can remember and the bands that stuck out for you that you really liked in the early 80s hardcore punk scene, the bands that, you dug.
Vicious Circle was definitely a favourite. I'd see them as often as I could. I started seeing Max, the bass player of Mental Health, who went on to Warp Spasm. So I was obviously involved going out all the time with him to see his band, to support him and see all the other bands. But Vicious Circle was definitely a favourite. I love the Cosmic Psychos, but that's a bit later.
That scene crossed over. I mean, there was that garage Detroit scene that I really liked as well, like Lime Spiders and Hard-Ons and Psychotic Turnbuckles that come down from Sydney. And, and then there was Cosmic Psychos in Melbourne and, all the other garage, Gas Babies and the Shindiggers and all that kind of stuff. And that was all going along at the same time as the bands that are in your book, like the hardcore punk bands. But you also mention a couple of other bands in the book, Death Sentence and Gash. I mean, you must have loved Gash. I mean, that stands for Girls Against Sexist Hype. What a great name. I mean, tell us about your recollections of Gash.
At the time, there was not very many bands that had a lot of girls in them, so I was really excited about that band because of the girl factor.
Your book's called Fly, and it's available on Amazon.com on the net, if people want to buy it.
Yep, it's probably easier to go to my website. That'll give you a long list of all the Melbourne shops, Victorian shops that it's in, and a direct link to Amazon.
It's a really good read, Anne, and it's good that you've survived the expedition. And while you're in that lonely flat in Amsterdam, you got that bright idea to write a period piece on the Melbourne hardcore punk scene. It's not that band orientated, it's more of a personal journey, but it's a great journey.
Well, it's a personal journey within a scene full of hardcore punk bands,
All right.
Watts and whatnot.
All right, well, thanks very much for taking time out.
No worries, thank you.
Something better.